Hello and welcome to those listening in on probably the recording. We still may have one participant after dialing into the live call. Nathan is not here today. He has unfortunately got a schedule conflict and he was unable to make it. He'll be chairing the next meeting as usual. I'm stepping in for Nathan, and we're going to talk about two topics: the Wikipedia page and our new Markdown flowcharts. Before we move into our topics today, I'm going to share our antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every meeting, the Linux Foundation. The purpose is to ensure that everyone knows how we work together. You'll find the full antitrust policy on our website, and you are most welcome, if you're from an LF member company, to direct any questions to our counsel, Andy Updegrove. With that out of the way, let's dive straight in. So we have a Wikipedia entry, which was created by Mark over at Nokia, and that has been a really useful addition to our community. Oh, hello. Someone just joined. Oh, they were just unmuted on entry. That's fine. No problem.
Yeah, hello Shane. It's only me. It's Martin Yagi. And previous one, a meeting that was scheduled at the same time is finished, so I can actually join. But
oh, fantastic!
But you know what's going on anyway, so kind of yeah.
Well, I noticed on our first topic today, just the Wikipedia page, and I just put the link into the chat, that we had a quite big update. I flagged that the certification of the Wikipedia page was quite limited. It basically talked about third-party certification, and it followed a particular workflow for certification that looks pretty similar to how companies in Germany may choose to do third-party certification. But there are other methods of third-party certifying people. And of course, there are other options like self-certification and independent assessment. And I flagged that we probably wanted to add self-certification and independent assessment to our Wikipedia page. And then suddenly, gosh, the page was updated before our call. Someone went to work and did the update for us, which is fantastic. And just taking a quick look at who may have done it on Wikipedia, I actually don't see who did it. Oh, Jacob did it.
Yeah, it was me. And I tried to put it on the mailing list as well. There's not really good like version control, like how GitHub does it on Wikipedia, but
right.
Yeah, it just kind of commits whatever the latest information is, unlike approvals of commits and stuff with GitHub. But I just put it in there, and I figured we could revise it during this call.
Well, that is just super fantastic. This new text, I think, is really useful. It begins to show people what we do. And Jacob, that was a lot of writing. Thank you so much for like sneaking it in ahead of our call, which did all of the hard work for us. Yeah. So when it comes to looking at the text that's there, I think it's really, really good. The only suggestion I have off the top of my head was with third-party certifiers and the first sentence, which is just nitpicking, because I think you capture it well that there's so many options for certification. So the first sentence on third-party certifiers just struck me as maybe we could do something there. The current sentence is this. And I was just saying, rather than is carried out, be carried out by by a registered third-party certifier. So the first one is saying the certification is carried out by a registered third-party certifier, but I'd suggest we might look at changing it to third-party certification can be carried out by an official OpenChain certifier. And the reason I suggest that is can, to remove the definitive is carried out, because the next sentence says there's plenty of other options too. And then changing from registered certifier into official certifier, because registered could be seen as saying that OpenChain is some kind of registration authority. And there's different ways to look at it, like being nitpicky. Well, of course, we're an authority on OpenChain, but in many countries, registered implies government sanctioned according to government rules. So actually, that's the first thing that would come to mind, changing that sentence. And I just wanted to check, what do you think? Everyone's like, I don't care.
I struggled a little bit with this because I wanted to kind of maintain what was previously written as best as I could. I didn't want to remove any information because I didn't believe it to be false. But yeah, this first sentence was the part that I expanded upon because I think can be carried out. We can also just remove the word registered in that first sentence to say it's carried out by an OpenChain third-party certifier listed, rather than implying that there's a registration process.
Right. That's pretty good. I'm in big favor of actually removing a word whenever we can. And maybe we could take another section out, third-party certification of compliance with OpenChain. ISO blah, blah, blah can be carried out. Maybe we could change it to third-party certification for OpenChain and make the sentence into this: third-party certification for OpenChain ISO IEC 5230 can be carried out by an OpenChain third-party certifier listed on the OpenChain partners website. OpenChain can be, apologies, I'm typing, carried out by an OpenChain. So this is what I suggest maybe then we'd end up with as this sentence. It's in the, in the chat. I sent the text. All right, Jacob gives a thumbs up. With this with this sentence, Jacob, would you like to do the honors? Submit it. But there's another one I wanted to touch on in the second paragraph. And this is the original text. So Jacob maintained the original text. And there's just one thing I'd like to suggest we change. It's the second sentence. So the second sentence, I'm putting it in the chat right now. It's saying the audit is carried out in 3 stages as defined by ISO 17021. And that's very prescriptive. It's saying that you have to do the audit according to another ISO number. And I think the thing is, you can, but you don't have to. If you're a national certifier in a country, you might be following a completely different process according to your local jurisdiction and so on. So I would, oh, sorry, go ahead. My apologies.
So as background noise. I mean, strictly speaking, it says usually carried out, but I have no idea whether that's what usually happens or not. So can't really comment, but if we're not confident that usually is correct, then yeah, should remove it, I think.
Yeah, we at this juncture in time, we only know that someone said that can be done with no indication that is the norm of practice. So I was going to suggest that we turn this into an example. And I was going to suggest we turn the sentence into this. For example, this audit or the audit can be carried out in 3 stages as defined in ISO IEC 17021. And then it goes on into that. So it changes from this audit is usually carried out in 3 stages into, for example, the audit can be carried out. And my suggestion was that this might be more flexible in case people are doing something else. And at the moment, I have had no indication that our third-party certifiers are coalescing around ISO 17021. Just checking if anyone has any.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. So would you prefer an example of how this audit can be carried out in 3 stages? Oh, yeah, no. For example, the audit can be carried out in 3 stages. It seems like the good language. Okay. Yeah. No, I think this is good. I mean, I'm looking at the rest of the text. The self-certification checklist, the self-certification questionnaires. In fact, it's private until you submit or you decide to announce. Independent assessment looks good. All of this text looks solid to me. I mean, everything now looks to me like wordsmithing. So, for example, the results of the assessment are private until an organization decides to submit them for publication. That's correct. But once or twice, people have contacted me like, we have a really cool set of announcements coming out in the next couple of months. And one company sent me a huge amount of documentation, and they were like, here's our here's our conformance material. And I was like, okay, you can just tell me you're conformant. I mean, just tell me you're conformant and let's write the blog post. So sometimes people confuse what they need to do in letting us know they're conformant with sending us all the like artifacts. Here's the artifacts. Where are you going to store them? Nowhere, in the deleted email folder, I guess. This is being tried, and if you're listening to the recording, you might be thinking, why is he being silly? But there's a serious point here. All you have to do to make your conformance public is tell someone that it's public. Because your conformance itself, in the final part of the standard, so section 6, you will have prepared a description of how you did the conformance. You don't have to give that out publicly. You don't have to do that. You can just tell people you're conformant. And then your customer or supplier companies in your procurement cycle and procurement contracts could include a request to see your section 6 material, your record of how you did it. But for everyone else, you don't have to do that. You just have to say, I'm conformant. And then essentially appropriate people in your commercial transactions can ask you for details of how you're conformant. So anyway, my point is that results of the assessment are private until the organization decides to submit them for publication. In wordsmithing, we could, for instance, say, okay, sometimes people get a little confused and they just do more than they need to. And that's taking up probably more effort than they need to. So maybe the results of the assessment are private until the organization decides to announce their conformance publicly. And that would just suggest that the only thing you have to do is announce. What do you think about that? Is that clearer? Is that not? And I'm just putting it in the chat. So once the organization completes the self-assessment questionnaire, it can choose to submit its results for publication on the OpenChain website. However, the progress and results of the assessment are private until the organization decides to announce their conformance publicly. That would be the new version. Do you prefer that to the old version, or do you want to keep the old version?
So essentially, the new language would include public announcements.
Yeah. And it would actually make public announcement the only action to take after you're conformant.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the rationale I'd have behind that is that you can have your compliance artifacts requested at any time by your suppliers or customer companies through their procurement contracts, because by the very act of becoming conformant, by section 6 of the standard, you had to make a record of how you did it. So that record has to exist. And the only question is who should have access to it? And the answer is probably not everyone, just people in your supply chain.
Yeah, that's very similar to how like SOC 2s and things, SOC 1, SOC 2s are handled. The evidence is kind of a controlled artifact.
Which makes a lot of sense. You could be revealing business processes you just didn't want to talk about. And this could be for very good reasons, because you've got something incredible like your new AI compliance system that does all the work, or it could be from the simple fact that, like many companies, your compliance process relies on one or two people and good documentation. But you might not want to say either one, that, actually, as a multinational corporation selling millions of devices every year, our entire OSPO is two people. And that's fine. It works. Many multinationals are doing exactly that, and they are not making errors. But you might want to keep that private, and that's fine. There's no reason for you to make it public. So, Jacob, I think you hit the nail on the head. People should be able to control the details of their compliance artifacts, and it should be based on the letter of requirements. So we're talking about law, we're talking about contract negotiation. And for those of you watching the recording and thinking, why is this even a topic? Sometimes in open source, we've had social discussions, and this is not about contract, this is not about requirements in law. We've had social discussions where some parties want everything to be open, every process, every methodology, everything to be open to insight, to review, to criticism. And there's arguments that could be good, but there's also arguments that could be not good. And for OpenChain, we don't want to take a side on any of those topics. It's not our business to be prescriptive on these things. So we should sidestep that and basically let the companies work it out in their supply chain and whatever they want to do. Okay, so basically I just wanted to say that ISO entry on Wikipedia is looking awesome. We went through 3 items of wordsmithing, changing third-party certification of compliance with OpenChain. ISO 5230 is carried out by a registered third-party certifier, and we changed that. We changed it into a third-party certification for OpenChain. 5230 can be carried out by an OpenChain third-party certifier listed on the OpenChain Partners website. And then we changed this audit is usually carried out for third-party. This audit is usually carried out in 3 stages as defined in ISO 17021. We changed it into, for example, the audit can be carried out in 3 stages as defined by ISO 17021. Again, not prescriptive. And then in the section about self-certification and letting people know, we're going to change the text, independent assessment and letting people know. Is that independent? No, it's self-certification. My apologies. Self-certification paragraph 3. We're going to change the text that results of the assessment are private until the organization decides to submit them for publication, which is factually correct. There's no problem there. But we know sometimes people oversubmit. They misread it. And we're changing that. The results of the assessment are private until the organization decides to announce their conformance publicly. Jacob, your hand is up. Over to you.
So I wanted to touch on this a little bit, and you mentioned it earlier that companies that wish to certify are submitting more evidence than what's required. And I think it's probably a misunderstanding on, self-certification versus independent assessment. Would it be worthwhile to maybe provide more guidance for, paths towards independent assessment, more than just those 5 bullet points? Because I embellished a little bit from the OpenChain artifacts in GitHub to create that. I don't know if that's something that companies and organizations would value, like additional guidance.
I think that's a really good idea. So I'm going to throw this up to the rest of the room, but I think Jacob's onto something to essentially describe the value proposition. And here I'm not just talking commercial in sense of commercial sale value proposition, but value proposition as a company for heading into independent assessment. And part of that is the mental model of what you do, which would include finding a third party and handing them your entire compliance artifacts for conformance to let them see. I mean, I think the current language is pretty good. I don't know if everyone else has had a chance to look at it. I think it's pretty good, but I think there's room to expand on it as well. So as far as I understand, from what I'm seeing in the market, self-certification, sorry for the jumping around, I slipped on my mouse pad. Self-certification is what most companies do most of the time. But then independent assessment is what more and more companies are doing. So it's a big thing. It's a movement. And third-party certification is the least common thing to do, probably because it's the most expensive. So independent assessment, we should probably try to possible. I think the existing text is really good, actually, Jacob. But for the others on the call, if you could put eyes on this as well, it would be great. We don't have to do it now, but I think we could say that could be an area for attention.
I think for the intent of the Wikipedia page, this is sufficient, but maybe more artifacts that would be included in the OpenChain education resources or something like that.
That brings to the second point. So you found some information already in the OpenChain website or on the repo. If you could, after this call, send me a link to roughly where you found the original text that you took. Let's begin replacing it with your enhanced text and then build out. Maybe we have to edge towards a slide deck explaining self-certification, independent assessment, and third-party certification in more detail, or a handout, or essentially a playbook. Maybe this is something that we could usefully do. Just pausing here to see if Kevin and Martin or if Vaishali have any comments on the topic.
This is Kevin. It makes sense, but I don't have any additional comments.
Yeah, okay. Vaishali here. Yes, I completely agree to what you're saying. This is another not exactly related to the discussion, but one point was coming to my mind that should there be a duration added to this certification, like for 1 year or 2 years? And because reviews are, the specifications mention that reviews are kind of necessary. But then when company, third party or independent assessment, it doesn't mention that this certification, OpenChain certification, applies from this to this period. I'm not sure if it is required or not. This is just a thought.
It's a really good point. And what I'll do is I'll explain why we don't go into that detail. And that explanation is just intended to show you why we don't go into it, but maybe we do need to. The reason we don't go into it is because this is the ISO standard I'm showing now. So this is section 6 of the OpenChain version. So the ISO standard at the end has a duration, and it's saying you've got 18 months, and then you have to recheck. And the reason we don't mention the term of independent assessment or third-party certification is because the ISO standard has a term in it, but there's also something which is that a third-party certifier might give you a different term. So, for example, I'm picking a company name out of the ether here. This is not this is not what a company is the company is doing as far as I know. But a company that could certify you, like Deloitte, might say the Deloitte third-party certification will last 12 months.
Okay.
So that's an interesting point. I'd actually like to suggest to the room, maybe we could add this. Maybe we could. Maybe we could point out that independent assessment is of or what's in the ISO standard, but third-party certification could have additional terms, right? They're certifying you against the ISO standard, but they might introduce another term and say, our certificate saying that you're operating according to this standard is only valid for 12 months. So we might need to talk about that. We might need to think about how to talk about that. I don't have a clear path here. I just think that you brought up an interesting point. So, yeah.
Thank you, Shane.
Although, thank you. It's really important to touch on these things. And sometimes we have assumptions. Like our assumption, quite frankly, is that everyone self-certifying will obviously follow the standard. They have 18 months, but that everyone getting third-party certified, we kind of assume the third-party certifiers will just do exactly what's in the standard for duration. They don't have to, though. They could say, we're certifying you as meeting this ISO standard, but we're only saying you meet it. We're only guaranteeing that that you met it for 12 months, and then we want to check again. That's their right to do that if they feel like it.
This is Kevin. From the point of an external assessor, I think the terms are almost, I mean, as often as possible for the consultancy or assessor, that they're attesting that practices were conformant on basically the date that they were executed. They're not necessarily going to have any method to provide a warranty or guarantee beyond that. Even SOC 2 is a certification that says at this time I had these appropriate controls or something like that. So I'm not sure that they would ever necessarily build in a duration to say how long you were conformant. But yeah, there is and the periodic nature, I think, would be up to the organization itself to say if I wanted to get a subsequent conformance check on an interval or not. I'm not sure there's a reason to be prescriptive there.
That's a good point, Kevin. And as to your point, for a lot of the time, all you see is that someone said someone else met the requirements at the time of the audit, and that's what you have in play.
Yeah, the market for like SOC, it's going to be the market that drives additional, okay, you were assessed a year ago, but we're requiring, or in our analysis, we want to see a recent SOC 2 example. It doesn't invalidate, previous SOC 2s or something like that.
That's a good point as well. And yeah, I mean, I saw one certificate, and a lot of third-party certifiers, by the way, for those on the call or watching, don't exactly put their certificates on their website. They keep it a bit quiet, and they give it to the company, and the company shows it to suppliers. But one certificate I did see from a company that got certified basically did include a duration. It said that this certifier certifies that this company meets the requirements of this ISO standard, and the certificate is valid until X period. But that was very much, their own choice. They decided to put that in play. They were doing it in a market where that kind of long-term stamp of approval is common. It was in Japan. And I think that's just happened to be what they did. There's no reason a third-party certifier has to do that. Martin, over to you. You're muted, Martin.
Yeah, hi. I was looking again at the Wikipedia page directly. I guess I don't have any good answer to this, but I'm struggling a bit with it. I guess because this is all under the conformance certification bit, but it seems like it's a little bit of a mix. So certification, then we've got self-certification. Okay, that's clear. That's still certifying yourself. Then independent assessment is kind of a mix of an assessment internally of what you're doing, or it might be a third party that you work with doing some assessment, and it might lead to some certification. So a bit kind of woolly to me. And then it goes on to talk about third party certification, where the goal is clearly certification. Does that make sense? So the first one is definitely results in certification. The second bullet point results in don't know what really. And the third one results in certification. I just find it kind of reads a bit odd, but I don't have a good answer to that. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes sense. It does make sense. And this might touch on Jacob's point that we might need to work on independent assessment. The fundamental takeaway should be that independent assessment is when someone looked at your self-certification and maybe gave you some suggestions for improvement, ultimately. So in that case, perhaps we should maybe remove bullet point 5, which mentions a certification. Or we should reword it.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, if that internal assessment is being done by a third party, is it strictly speaking a third party certification? Is it? I don't know.
It's a good point. And the answer is, I think, honestly, it depends. So in some,
I think it's a self-certification, isn't it? Isn't a self-certification backed by an independent assessment?
Right. Exactly. So it's a self-certification.
So it's probably a sub bullet of the first one, isn't it? Or a subsection of the first. I don't know. It probably still won't read right, but yeah.
So my intention with the expansion on independent assessment is to essentially set the stage for providing a level of assurance. So Shane, you mentioned earlier like recommendations. I intentionally left recommendations out of here because I believe that would be a gap analysis. That would be a more program level discussion. So that would be independent of certification. The independent assessment would be a level of assurance towards your program, and it's independent and unbiased. That's the differentiation from self-certification. And there would need to be evidence of that independence. So if it's internal to the organization, there would have to be a different reporting line or a different person collecting evidence versus reporting on it, providing that level of assurance. The third-party certification is different from that independent assessment because there is most often a regulatory body or a certifier which provides an additional layer. So in addition to the third-party certifier, there's somebody holding that third-party certifier accountable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And this prevents a third-party certifier from essentially printing certificates because someone is watching them. No, I mean this all makes sense. So in the chat, I just put a suggested remix. So first of all, in the chat, there's the current language saying the certification bullet point. And then I just put a suggested remix here, which might clarify or might not. So let's consider certification. If the organization has successfully demonstrated compliance with the OpenChain specification, the assessor will issue a certificate of compliance with the requirements of OpenChain ISO 5230. Is that making things better or making things more confusing? Martin suggests we might fix it by just changing the header, which could work too. Independent assessment for self-certification. So what do you think, everyone? And it's equally valid to say, guys, you're going down a rabbit hole. Please stop. Okay, we've got some agreement here. So maybe we change the header. Independent assessment for self-certification. I mean, ultimately, one of the secret plans of OpenChain has always been that the market will increase infidelity, and not everyone will need to do this, but there will be a path in the market over the years of people going from self-certification to independent assessment to third-party certification. And kind of the idea was always that this is a path, a growth path. And some companies will get to independent assessment and think that's enough. We don't need more. But the growth path should be from self-certification through the third-party certification over time and if appropriate. So independent assessment should be a midpoint. And it should also be the midpoint that most companies stop at. And they're like, okay, so essentially we've had an audit of our self-certification. We're done. That's good. Okay. So the proposal on the table is that we only change the the heading from independent assessment into independent assessment for self-certification or of self-certification. Who agrees and who disagrees? We have one agreement. If there's no disagreements, then we'll be actioning this. If there's a disagreement, we can pause and talk it through. Okay, Kevin's in agreement. Oh, a question came in here from Vaishali. Should we define a profile for independent assessor? The answer is we don't, because around the world it really changes. So in some places, your independent assessor is a consultancy. In some places, it's a law firm. And we don't want to define a profile. The variables that we know exist in the market. There's a lot of difference in different geographies. So if we start to define something, we will potentially exclude the current reality of a certain geography. That I can bring to mind, you see, is an independent assessment application.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your last sentence.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Owen. In the UK, we might hire a consultant to do it, who isn't, seen as, oh, they're an accounting auditor. This background, they come from a different background. And in Japan, again, you might choose a firm that provides outsourcing of corporate activity. There's organizations, NEC or Hitachi Solutions, that independent assessment in the Japanese market, because they're in a position to understand your company, and they're in a position to say, yes, we would execute in this way as well. Well done. All right, so we have a header change, and we have a couple of changes in the Wikipedia page discussed earlier. But in essence, I mean, what we have is a really good Wikipedia page, and we'll keep refining it over time. And then we will also take self-certification, independent assessment, and third-party certification material starting here. And we're going to try and make better reference material in the main OpenChain resources, as per Jacob's point, which I concur. Let's try to make this better for people. Oh, everyone! I just noticed something we should change. The first sentence of the Wikipedia page. ISO 5230, known as OpenChain. That's correct, but it might confuse people. Formally speaking, the standard is called this. I'm just putting it in. It's called OpenChain, ISO IEC 5230:2020. We might want to change the opening because OpenChain, it could be OpenChain project, OpenChain ISO 5230, or coming right out now, it could be the new security standard, ISO DIS 18974. So we might want to just change the opening here. And the only change I think would be to change that opening from ISO 5230, known as OpenChain, just change it into OpenChain ISO 5230. That's my thought. And okay, if that's okay with you, I will edit the Wikipedia page later and put these stuff in. Okay. Next part. The next part is short, and again, goodness gracious me, we've got Jacob doing too much work again. He's been doing amazing things with the flowcharts, and he's been using something called Mermaid Live Editor, which looks like this. I'm just sharing now. And this allows you to make flowcharts really quickly that display really well on GitHub, but also give you the potential to start putting things into other areas like other e-learning platforms. And we had some flowcharts for GPL2 compliance, which he reworked completely from the existing Microsoft Word documents into this flowchart language. And now it displays on our GitHub very nicely. It looks like this. I'm just going to open one of them, distribution type. It's just building it here as it builds the flowchart. That's it. Build a flowchart and tells you what other flowcharts to look at depending on what you're up to. It's simple, it's clear, and it's interesting because when you go into, why can't I edit it here? It won't let me edit it on this page. Okay, let's go to the raw and see if we can see the text. This markdown text is really easy to read, really easy to adjust, and really easy to adapt. I'm not able to get into what I wanted to get into here. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's it. It looks like that. So it's just some text with a logic flow, which could be a little hard to understand, but there's a live editor that shows you what you're doing. And what Jacob has essentially done with our flowcharts by doing this is created a way for us to put these flowcharts into places like the markdown version of our training slides, maybe the future version of our online courses, and potentially to take this logic and workflow and move beyond the GPL to compliance flowcharts. Maybe we can start making a lot more flowcharts around our topics. Flowcharts for adopting OpenChain, flowcharts for other types of compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Jacob has hit on something that could help us really build out some useful material. But I had a question for you, my dear friends. Flowcharts, it looks like we now have a way to make many, many flowcharts. Should we make many, many flowcharts? Should we just have a few flowcharts for a few specific things? Or should we start looking at having flowcharts to help people with more aspects of adopting and using OpenChain, general compliance management, and so on? Should we use them to describe reference process workflows?
So I'll speak because I contributed the code here. But first of all, the screen capture on the OpenChain website, if you change your view mode to light versus dark on GitHub, you should be able to screen capture it um, to be to be in a different color format if you'd like, just for formatting. In reference to creating more or less flowcharts, I think where it makes sense, right? I'm a big fan of putting data in tables rather than flowcharts, but what I liked about this solution in particular is the fact that if we want to discuss a particular box or a particular arrow going from one box to another, we can do that as a comment in GitHub directly. We don't have to reference an image. We can reference the actual text and change formatting. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of flexibility in formatting, colors, that type of thing. It's very basic, but it allows us to collaborate better, I believe.
Everyone, I'm so sorry. I got booted from the room due to a Wi-Fi failure. So I'm not sure where the conversation lost me and where it restarted. But my question was, should we make more flowcharts? And I think Jacob probably picked up that thread and talked about the potential and limitations on this. So I'm just curious, Martin, Kevin, Vasali, what do you think? Would more flowcharts be a useful initiative for us to push in the next couple of months?
Yeah, yeah, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. So
You
I
go.
think, okay, fine. Thank you. I think flowcharts are really useful, and in case of licenses and particularly GPL and all, they are certainly more useful because most of the, where I have worked, the legal teams, they are not as much well versed with this GPL. The reasons, different terms and conditions, and how to apply them to the code where GPL is. Where that code is covered under GPL. So they kind of get stuck, and the process of clearing or approving that code becomes really time consuming. So if the lawyers come to this page and they can simply say, and the developers answer their questions, this process will become, it will become very easy for them. So I think flowcharts will be very useful.
Yeah, I'm back in the room again. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think I thought this flowchart was interesting, actually. And I agree that I think we should make more use of flowcharts. This particular one is kind of quite tied to the description, I guess, in the extract of the book. So I wouldn't want to use the specific flowchart outside of that context. But I certainly agree with the approach.
Yeah, so the only disadvantage to using flowcharts is it makes it seem more prescriptive for some reason. When you see text, you can have a little bit more nuance and it can be a little bit more suggestive. As soon as there's a visual that depicts a process, it becomes fairly concrete. And I've heard even on today's call, Shane, you've made sure to keep that nuance of making sure it's not prescriptive in there. So I think flowcharts incredibly useful for making something visually easier to understand, but it's double-edged with the prescriptiveness.
That's a really, really good point. What if we accidentally created a reference flowchart that people misread as a requirement flowchart? And given that, for instance, we tell people, please let us know if you're OpenChain conformant, and sometimes they overshare, it's clear that people often are leaning towards doing as much as possible to be as right as possible. So they might read a reference flowchart and think, gosh, you know what? I should do exactly this just to be safe. And the answer could be, no, we didn't mean that. This was just brainstorming.
Well, yeah, I think some people will look to do that if they don't have any experience in the area, right? They'll start with that and not necessarily understand the nuance. So we don't kind of follow that kind of flow chart as such here. It's more based on the license rather than the component as such. But for example, where like you're okay to use the component, there might be additional rules attached to that component to be used. For example, using some particular compile switch, which removes some particular license stuff as an example. But for a company that are new to OpenChain, new to conformance, it's a pretty good starting point. They just need to understand the limits, if that makes sense.
That's a great point as well. I mean, a huge number of companies seem to just take our reference training slides and use them. And that's fine. They had nothing in place, and now they have something in place. Here's an idea, and this isn't something for this call, it's just an idea. On our legal work group, we're about to work on model provisions for putting OpenChain into procurement, to translate that into more direct English example contract language. And one of the approaches to make sure no one mistakes it as prescriptive is that I'm thinking of suggesting to the legal work group, why don't we always try to have several different examples for each topic? And that's to show that there's no right example. There's like 3 for each topic. And maybe with flowcharts, which aren't purely unambiguously, it must be this because this is what the GPL license told you to do. Maybe we should look at having more than one example. Just a thought. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approach. And just because I wanted to raise it at some point anyway, I think this ties into the activity I've been trying to do in terms of like the bite-sized video and instruction things, where I'm wanting to kind of illustrate some of the more subtle points. And this is where one of the ways that this could be done.
Absolutely. Yeah, okay. But pulling back then, with proviso of let's be very careful that our examples don't become law. It does sound like this flowchart approach could be opening doors to us to quickly spin up material. And here's a safe haven to get started. Our reference training slides are in Markdown, but they're missing all of the cool flowcharty bits because those are images right now. And with the Markdown version of our training material, maybe we can start a conversion process of looking at the images and turning them into these flowcharts using this method. It's not so many images, it's not so much work, but it could give us a starting point for building out these new flowcharts. It's not a controversial thing and it won't cause confusion. And if people get comfortable with this and they're thinking, yeah, I like this workflow, we'll have the new reference training slides in Markdown to make it easier to adapt the training material much faster. And B, we'll have acclimatized ourselves to this flowchart workflow and we can start applying it to new areas. Would it be okay to suggest that that will be the outcome of our meeting today, just this concept? Okay, we're going to follow the ARN rule of OpenChain, which is that no one disagreed, so now it's law. So what we'll do then is we'll take that approach. And there we've hit the top of the hour. So Jacob, the Wikipedia page contribution, helping to fill that out, and these flowcharts, brilliant. Your flowcharts have been released. That came out today. our Chinese community flagged that they're translating their the flowcharts as well. We're improving the Wikipedia page. The 3 suggestions we had, I am including that into the page right now, and it'll be flagged, these changes and outcomes of this call. Moving forward, the next big step for us is to look at the reference training material and change the images on the PowerPoint slides into these flowcharts using this editor, this Made Live editor. So that'll be one of the initiatives for the future. But most of that work lies ahead, and Nathan will be back for the next call to lead the discussion then. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I just wondered, what's the status of the update to the LFC 193 content? Is that completed?
Great
now?
question. Great question. So the training team passed it from the coordinator onto the update people, and I will double check if they've executed or not. It was passed over about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We completed all of our work. LF Training's online training supervisor flagged it to their team to upload. I admit I do not have the information if they've uploaded it or not yet. I will take the action item to go and approach them, and I will email the mailing list within the next couple of days with the answer. If they haven't updated it yet, because we did want it updated, I'll push them to do it as soon as possible, certainly before the legal and licensing workshop in Sweden on the 19th of April. Thank
Okay,
you, Martin.
that's great.
Good,
Thanks.
Good,
yeah.
Good ping. Good ping. Good ping. All right, all. Have a beautiful day, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for contributing to making our material better.